The Idaho student murders, the case that shocked America. If you're easily disturbed, you might want to click away now because what I'm about to tell you is one of the most chilling cases in recent American history. But before we dive into this nightmare, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, drop a comment telling me what case you want covered next, and turn on those notifications because you do not want to miss what's coming. Trust me, this story will keep you up at night. Let's get into it. November 13th, 2022. Moscow, Idaho. A small college town where nothing bad ever happens. Population of only 25,000 people, most of them students at the University of Idaho. It's the kind of place where people don't lock their doors, where neighbors know each other by name, where parents send their kids to college without a second thought about safety. That sense of security was about to be shattered forever. For students lived in a white, 3-story house at 1122 King Road, just off campus. Madison Mogen, 21 years old, a senior studying marketing. Kaylee Goncalves, also 21, Madison's best friend since 6th grade, studying general studies. Xana Kernodle, 20 years old, a junior majoring in marketing. And Ethan Chapin, 20 years old, Xana's boyfriend, a freshman studying recreation, sport, and tourism management. They also had 2 other roommates living on the first floor. It was a typical college house, full of life, laughter, and dreams about the future. That Saturday night started like any other weekend for college students. Madison and Kaylee went to a local bar called the Corner Club. Surveillance footage shows them there, smiling, having fun, completely unaware that they had only hours left to live. Around 1:30 in the morning, they stopped at a food truck called the Grub Truck. More surveillance footage captured them ordering pasta, chatting with each other, acting completely normal. They got a ride home and arrived back at the King Road house around 1:45 a.m. Xana and Ethan had gone to a fraternity party that same evening. They returned home around 1:45 a.m. as well, right around the same time as Madison and Kaylee. The house was full. 6 young people were inside that night. For on the upper floors, 2 roommates on the bottom floor. Everyone was settling in for the night, ready to sleep after a typical Saturday of college fun. But someone else was watching that house. Someone who had been watching for weeks, maybe months. Someone who had been planning something unspeakable. At approximately 4 a.m., while the house was quiet and the students were sleeping, a killer entered through a sliding glass door on the 2nd floor. The door had been left unlocked. It was a fatal mistake that would cost 4 innocent lives. What happened next was brutality beyond imagination. The killer moved through the house with terrifying efficiency. Madison and Kaylee were on the 3rd floor, sleeping in the same room. They were attacked first, stabbed multiple times while they slept. They didn't have time to fight back, didn't have time to scream for help. The attack was swift and silent. 2 bright, beautiful young women with their whole lives ahead of them, gone in moments. The killer then moved to the 2nd floor. Xana and Ethan were in Xana's bedroom. Unlike the attack upstairs, this one was different. There were signs of a struggle. Xana tried to fight back. She was awake when the killer entered her room. Ethan tried to protect her. But they were both overpowered and stabbed to death. The weapon was a large fixed-blade knife, and the killer knew exactly how to use it. One of the surviving roommates, identified only as DM in court documents, heard something that night. She heard crying, heard someone say something like, "There's someone here." She opened her bedroom door to check. She saw a figure dressed in black, wearing a mask that covered the person's mouth and nose. The figure walked right past her toward the sliding glass door. She was frozen in fear, terrified, confused about what she was witnessing. She locked herself in her room and didn't come out. She had no idea that 4 of her friends had just been murdered. The other surviving roommate on the 1st floor heard nothing. The house fell silent. The killer left through the same sliding door they had entered. By 4:20 a.m. it was over. 4 lives had been taken in less than 20 minutes. The killer vanished into the darkness, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. Hours passed. Morning came. The surviving roommates thought their housemates were just sleeping in. But as the day went on, something felt wrong. Friends tried calling Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan. No one answered. By 11:58 a.m. on Sunday, November 13th, one of the surviving roommates called 911. The call was about an unconscious person, which is often code dispatchers use for something much worse. Police arrived at 11:58 a.m. What they found inside that house would haunt them forever. 4 young people, dead in their beds, victims of a brutal stabbing attack. Blood everywhere. The scene was so horrific that even experienced officers were shaken. The Moscow Police Department had never handled anything like this before. This was a small-town police force suddenly dealing with a quadruple homicide that would become national news within hours. The news spread fast. By that evening, the story was everywhere. Parents were calling their kids at colleges across the country, terrified. The University of Idaho community was in shock. Vigils were held. Flowers piled up outside the King Road house. 4 young lives, full of potential and promise, were gone. Madison, who loved fashion and had dreams of working in marketing. Kaylee, who was about to graduate and had just gotten a job lined up in Austin, Texas. Xana, who was passionate about her studies and loved spending time with Ethan. And Ethan, a freshman just starting his college journey, his whole future stolen from him. But the horror wasn't over. The killer was still out there. The Moscow Police Department had no suspects, no arrests, and very few leads. The community was terrified. Parents pulled their students out of the university. People bought security systems and weapons. Nobody felt safe anymore. And the question on everyone's mind was simple but terrifying. Who did this, and would they kill again? The investigation began immediately, but progress was painfully slow. The Moscow Police Department worked around the clock, but days turned into weeks with no arrests. The pressure was enormous. National media had descended on the small town. True crime content creators were making videos about the case. Reddit forums exploded with amateur detectives proposing theories. The families of the victims were desperate for answers, appearing on news shows, begging for information. The police released small bits of information to the public, trying to balance the need for help with the need to protect the integrity of their investigation. They confirmed that the weapon was a large fixed-blade knife, something like a military-style combat knife or a hunting knife. They said the attack appeared targeted, meaning the killer had specifically chosen that house and those victims. This didn't make anyone feel safer. If it was targeted, why? What was the motive? Detectives interviewed hundreds of people. They tracked down everyone who had been at the bar with Madison and Kaylee, everyone at the fraternity party with Xana and Ethan. They reviewed thousands of hours of surveillance footage from businesses around Moscow. They collected DNA evidence from the crime scene. They built a timeline of the victims' last hours. But still, no suspect emerged. The public grew frustrated. Some criticized the police for not working fast enough, for not sharing enough information. But behind the scenes, investigators were following a crucial lead. They had found DNA evidence at the crime scene. It was touch DNA, the kind left behind when someone touches something with their bare skin. The DNA didn't match anyone in the criminal database, which meant the killer had no prior serious criminal record. But they had the DNA profile, and they just needed to find who it belonged to. Investigators also had another piece of evidence. Security cameras near the house had captured a white Hyundai Elantra driving in the area multiple times in the hours before and after the murders. The car had been seen passing the King Road house at least 4 times between 3 to 4 a.m. on the night of the murders. Police released information about the car to the public on December 7th, asking anyone who owned or knew someone who owned a white Hyundai Elantra from the years 2011 to 2013 to come forward. This is where the investigation took a major turn. Investigators began looking at white Hyundai Elantras registered in the area. One car kept popping up in their search. It was registered to someone living just minutes away from Moscow, across the state border in Pullman, Washington. The owner was Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old graduate student studying for his PhD in criminal justice at Washington State University. Bryan Kohberger was not what most people imagine when they think of a killer. He was educated, working on a doctorate degree. He had been a teaching assistant in the criminal justice department. His area of study was fascinating and disturbing in hindsight. He had posted a survey online earlier in the year asking criminals about their thought processes when committing crimes. He wanted to understand how criminals felt during and after their offenses, whether they had remorse, how they chose their victims. Reading that survey after the murders sent chills down people's spines. But having a white Hyundai Elantra wasn't enough for an arrest. Investigators needed more. They began surveillance on Kohberger, watching his movements, tracking where he went. They collected his trash from outside his parents' home in Pennsylvania, where he had gone for winter break. From that trash, they recovered DNA from Kohberger's father. They ran genealogical DNA testing and confirmed that the DNA found at the crime scene matched someone in the Kohberger family. Combined with all the other evidence, they had their suspect. On December 30, 2022, at approximately 3 a.m., law enforcement surrounded Bryan Kohberger's parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. A SWAT team moved in. Kohberger was arrested without incident. He was taken into custody, charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The news broke that morning, and the nation watched as this seemingly normal graduate student was led away in handcuffs. The evidence against him was substantial. The DNA at the crime scene. His white Hyundai Elantra seen near the house multiple times. Cell phone data showing his phone was near the King Road house at least 12 times prior to the murders, suggesting he had been stalking the victims. His phone went dark, meaning it was turned off or in airplane mode, during the time of the murders, then pinged again later as he drove away from the area. One of the surviving roommates had seen a figure leaving the house, and while she couldn't identify the person, the description was consistent with Kohberger's build and height. Kohberger was extradited back to Idaho in early January 2023. His preliminary hearing revealed even more disturbing details. Investigators had found a knife sheath at the crime scene, left behind on the bed next to one of the victims. The sheath had the DNA on it, the DNA that led them to Kohberger. It appeared the killer had accidentally left it behind in the chaos of the attack. This single mistake led to his capture. But Kohberger maintained his innocence. Through his public defender, he entered a plea of not guilty. He claimed he was out driving that night, something he did often to clear his head and look at the stars. He said he had never been inside the King Road house, had never met the victims, had no motive to hurt anyone. His defense team suggested that the evidence was circumstantial, that there could be other explanations for everything the prosecution had. The case dragged on for over 2 years. Kohberger's defense team filed motion after motion, trying to get evidence suppressed, trying to change the venue, arguing that their client couldn't get a fair trial with all the media coverage. The families of the victims suffered through delay after delay, desperate for justice but forced to wait as the legal process ground forward slowly. Every court appearance brought new media attention, new pain for everyone involved. The trial was set for June 2025 in Boise, Idaho, moved from Moscow because of concerns about finding an impartial jury. But then something unexpected happened. As the trial date approached, Bryan Kohberger's legal strategy changed. His attorneys began negotiating with prosecutors. The evidence was overwhelming. The DNA, the cell phone data, the vehicle sightings, the knife sheath, the survivor's description. A trial would likely end in conviction, and Idaho has the death penalty for aggravated murder. On July 2, 2025, nearly 3 years after the murders, Bryan Kohberger stood in a Boise courtroom and changed his plea. With cameras rolling and the nation watching, he pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. The courtroom erupted. Families of the victims broke down in tears. Some felt relief that there would finally be justice without a long, painful trial. Others felt anger that Kohberger was avoiding the death penalty through a plea deal. The plea agreement spared Kohberger from execution but guaranteed he would spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole. He would be sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each victim. The prosecution agreed to this deal for several reasons. It gave the family certainty and closure without putting them through the trauma of a trial. It avoided the risk, however small, of a jury deadlock or appeal issues. And it ensured Kohberger would die in prison. The sentencing hearing was held on July 23, 2025. One by one, family members of the victims stood and addressed Kohberger directly. Madison's mother described her daughter's infectious laugh, her dreams of working in fashion, how she would never get to see her daughter get married or have children. Kaylee's father talked about his little girl who loved pink everything, who had just gotten her dream job, who was supposed to graduate and start her life. Xana's family spoke about her kindness, her dedication to her studies, the future that was stolen from her. Ethan's parents remembered their son's gentle nature, his excitement about college, how his life had barely begun before it was ended. Kohberger sat silently through all of it, showing little emotion. When given a chance to speak, he declined. He offered no explanation, no apology, no remorse. The judge called the crimes heinous and senseless, saying that Kohberger had destroyed not just 4 lives but countless others, the families, friends, and communities torn apart by his actions. The judge imposed 4 consecutive life sentences without parole. Bryan Kohberger, at 30 years old, would spend every remaining day of his life behind bars. But many questions remain unanswered. Why did he do it? What was his motive? Did he know the victims, or were they randomly chosen? Kohberger has never explained and likely never will. Criminal psychologists have offered theories. Some suggest he was obsessed with true crime and wanted to commit the perfect murder, using his criminal justice education to plan the attack. Others think he may have been stalking one of the victims specifically, becoming obsessed and finally acting on his dark impulses. Some believe he simply wanted to know what it felt like to kill, conducting his own twisted research. The house at 1122 King Road is gone now. The university purchased the property and had it demolished in December 2023, about a year after the murders. The families supported this decision. The house had become a gruesome tourist attraction, with people taking selfies outside where 4 young people had been brutally murdered. It was disrespectful and painful. Now the lot sits empty, a memorial garden planned for the future, a place where people can remember Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan for who they were, not how they died. The University of Idaho community has slowly begun to heal, though the scars remain deep. Enrollment dropped significantly after the murders, with many students and parents fearful of safety. The university implemented new security measures, increased campus police presence, and offered extensive counseling services. The Corner Club, where Madison and Kaylee spent their last happy hours, closed its doors permanently in 2023. The owners said they couldn't continue operating knowing the tragedy that followed that night. The case changed Moscow forever. A town that prided itself on being safe and tight-knit learned that evil can appear anywhere, even in a quiet college community in Idaho. Hardware stores sold out of locks and security systems in the weeks after the murders. Parents became more protective. Students became more cautious. The innocence of the community was shattered, replaced with our awareness that terrible things can happen even in the safest seeming places. The surviving roommates, who have never been publicly identified beyond initials and court documents, face a lifetime of trauma. One of them saw the killer leave the house, a memory that will haunt her forever. Both will always carry the guilt of surviving when their friends did not, even though they did nothing wrong, even though there was nothing they could have done differently. They have received threats and accusations from internet trolls who blame them for not calling 911 immediately, cruel and baseless attacks on young women who were victims themselves. The investigation itself became a case study in modern detective work. The combination of traditional police work with cutting-edge technology solved the case. Surveillance cameras, cell phone tracking, genealogical DNA analysis, digital forensics. This case showed how law enforcement has evolved, how criminals can no longer disappear as easily as they once could. Bryan Kohberger studied criminal justice, thought he understood how investigations worked, but he made critical mistakes. He left DNA behind. He drove his own car to the scene multiple times. He kept his cell phone with him. These errors led to his capture. True crime enthusiasts followed every development of the case obsessively. Online communities like Reddit had threads with millions of views, with amateur detectives sharing theories and analyzing evidence. Some of this attention was helpful, providing tips to law enforcement. But much of it was harmful, with internet sleuths falsely accusing innocent people, spreading misinformation, and harassing anyone connected to the case. Several people were wrongly suspected and had their lives turned upside down by online mobs before Kohberger was arrested. It's a reminder of the dark side of true crime obsession. The families of Madison, Kaylee, Xana, and Ethan have tried to keep their children's memories alive in positive ways. Scholarships have been established in their names at the University of Idaho. Kaylee's parents started a foundation focused on campus safety and victim advocacy. Madison's family works to raise awareness about violence prevention. Xana and Ethan's family support causes the young couple cared about. They don't want their children remembered only as murder victims. They want people to remember the vibrant, loving, ambitious young people they were. Bryan Kohberger is currently incarcerated at the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. He's in protective custody, separated from the general prison population for his own safety. Inmates don't look kindly on those who murder young people. He receives no special treatment, no access to his academic work, no pathway to ever leaving prison. He'll likely spend decades in a small cell, the rest of his life defined by the worst thing he ever did. The case officially closed with his guilty plea and sentencing in July 2025, but the impact continues. Every parent who sends a child to college thinks about those 4 students in Idaho. Every young person living off campus checks their locks more carefully. Every community realizes that safety is never guaranteed. The Idaho student murders case became a turning point in American consciousness about campus safety and violence. What makes this case particularly haunting is how normal everything seemed that night. For friends, living their lives, having fun, completely unaware that evil was watching them. There were no warnings, no chance to escape. In the end, Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin are remembered not for how they died, but for how they lived. 4 bright lights extinguished far too soon, leaving behind families who will never be whole again, friends who lost their companions, and a community forever changed. Bryan Kohberger took their lives, but he couldn't take their legacy. They will be remembered long after his name is forgotten.